All right, it is noon. We'll go ahead and get started. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Clancy.
Here.
Member Days.
Here.
Councilmember Dunaway.
Present.
Councilmember Fitch.
Here.
Councilmember Tracus.
Present.
Councilmember Harder.
Here.
Councilmember Gray. Okay, Madam Chair, you do have a quorum.
Thank you. The committee takes official notice of and admits into evidence all St. Louis County ordinances and resolutions. So the purpose of this committee of the whole meeting today is for the county council and the public to discuss and inquire about bills 135, 136, and 137. This is legislation that pertains to authorizing and directing the issuance, sale, and delivery of general refunding obligation bonds, special general refunding obligation bonds, and taxable special obligation bonds, refunding bonds, prescribing the forms and details of the bonds, and authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul Kreidler, St. Louis County's Budget Director, for remarks and a presentation. Mr. Kreidler?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman Clancy and members of the committee for the opportunity this afternoon to discuss bills 135, 136, and 137, which will authorize the county's upcoming bonding program. We have several members of our financing team here available to assist with questions should they arise, but for your information, our financing team includes Winston Calvert, our Chief of Staff, Todd Martin, Director of Administration, Maggie Hartman from the County Counselor's Office, Adam Pope and Jeff White from Columbia Capital Management, who is our financial advisor, and Mark Grimm from Morbell, who is our bond counsel. But first, before I describe the transaction, some good news to report. At the end of last week, all three major bond rating agencies, which are Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, all affirmed the county's current bond rating. Our issuer default rating remains AAA, which is the highest possible rating with Moody's and Fitch, and S&P has rated us as AA+, which was our current rating. For this particular transaction, our general obligation bonds are rated as AAA or AA+, and our special obligation bonds are rated as AA. So the bills before you provide the opportunity to reduce existing debt service costs to our taxpayers by nearly $20 million and provide access to $14 million of new funds. And I believe you all should have the term sheet that describes these should you want a little more detail. I provided that to Carter Gibson yesterday. To the bills, bill number 135 authorizes refunding of 2012 tax-exempt court project bonds. And think of refunding like refinancing your home. We retire an outstanding bond issue by using the proceeds from a new bond issue with a lower interest rate, and that generates savings to our taxpayers. As a reminder, general obligation bonds are approved by the voter before they're issued. So this approval goes back to the original courts project, and they're secured by a dedicated property tax levy. Our current debt service levy is 1.9 cents for $100 of assessed value. The estimated savings due to this refunding transaction is $3.3 million over the remaining life of the bonds, which run through 2032. And please note that we have not extended the number of years for repayment for any of the bonds in these transactions. Also note on this bill, there was a Scrivener's error. There is a section related to a special obligation issue that was inadvertently left in this bill and should be removed. Therefore, we are requesting your consideration of a substitute bill and final passage of that bill at this afternoon's meeting. Bill number 136 refunds 8 series of tax-exempt special obligation bonds that the county issued between 2009 and 2012. Special obligation bonds are different because they are secured by the county's promise to appropriate the required debt service each year. So because these do not have a dedicated property tax backing them up, they're rated lower than general obligation bonds, and they'll carry a slightly higher interest rate. The estimated savings because of refunding these bonds is estimated to be nearly $16 million over the remaining life of these bonds, which go through 2035. However, it's important to know that not all of the savings is available to the general fund. These current series break down the savings, general fund 2.3 million, the special road and bridge fund 2.9 million, the health fund 1.1 million, and the emergency communications fund 9.6 million. And again, on these bonds, we are not extending the number of years left for repayment. Finally, Bill number 137 authorizes the issuance of 14 million of new taxable special obligation bonds. And this breaks down as follows. First, 3.5 billion is available as operating capital in the general revenue fund. The net effect, however, is that we will reimburse the Prop P fund balance for the purchase of land for a police precinct that was made in early 2019. These payments will run through 2040, so 20 years, and the annual debt service will be paid by Prop P, and that's about $220,000 per year. And this transaction was anticipated in the 2020 budget and financial plan. The remaining 10.5 million will also be available for operating capital in the general revenue fund. The net effect of this is that these bonds finance a recent legal settlement involving the police department over a 30-year period. The settlement was partially paid already through our self-insurance fund using balance from the general revenue fund, and this will restore that general revenue fund balance. The payments on this piece of the bond will go through 2050, so 30 years, and the annual debt service will be paid by general revenues, and that's estimated to be $520,000 per year. These bonds will be competitively sold with the general obligation series pricing on July 8th and the two series of special obligation bonds on July 9th. And we anticipate closing on the entire transaction on July 22nd. Given the current status of the municipal bond market, we expect a good financial result for the county and our taxpayers as a result of these issues. So on behalf of the rest of our financing team, I thank you for your consideration, and we'd be happy to answer any additional questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions from members of the committee?
Madam Chair.
Councilman Fitch.
Paul, 5 and 136 seem pretty straightforward to me. It's just basically like you said, refinancing the house. 137 is where my questions are, special obligation bonds. Special as opposed to general. What special supposed to indicate?
So this is just a descriptor for really the security for the bonds. A general obligation bond is a general obligation of the county, and in our case, it's secured by a dedicated property tax. A special obligation bond is secured by our promise to appropriate the debt service each year.
Okay, so the $10.5 million that will be generated by the sale of these bonds, what's the interest rate on that? Or does it fluctuate?
Well, yeah, it'll fluctuate, and we won't know for sure until we price. But for our calculations right now, we've estimated the true interest cost on these bonds at about 2.47%.
Okay, and to be clear, we're doing this specifically for the Wildhaber settlement. Is that accurate?
Yes, we're refunding that balance to the general revenue fund to provide us with budgetary flexibility going forward.
And hypothetically, if Bill 37 didn't pass, what would that mean to the general fund?
It would just mean that we would have a $10 million lower fund balance at the end of 2020.
Okay, and what anticipate at this point our fund balance to be anyway?
Well, that's a particularly difficult question this year because things are so fluid with COVID. But I will say that we anticipate the balance to be, as of right now, about $50 million at the end of 2020. And of that, $16 million is Prop P fund balance. So really about $34 million that could be available to spend. If we weren't to take in this 10 million for this, then that would drop that down to 40 million. And we do
Okay.
anticipate that we will, we're going to be using fund balance in 2020 due to the COVID revenue impact, and it's going to take us a number of years, I believe, to recover back to a pre-COVID revenue level.
Okay. So if I understand this correctly, we're basically taking out a 30-year loan to pay off the lawsuit to Wildhaber. Is that accurate?
That's one piece of it, and then also for the police precinct land purchase.
Right. And I'm just talking about the 10.35 million piece.
That's
Okay.
correct.
All right. Madam Chair, that's all the questions I have.
Madam Chair,
Councilman Harder.
thank you. Paul, I have a couple other questions on Bill 137. So we're looking again, as Councilman Fitch says, how much interest are we going to pay on that $10 million settlement for 30 years?
Right now, we're estimating that will be about 5.2 million over that 30-year period.
So basically, we're paying about 15 million as a result of that settlement, correct?
That's correct.
Now, we've sold the juvenile center for a net of about 9 million. Why don't we use that money from the juvenile center to pay this off so we're not obligated for this amount for the next 30 years?
Well, that is an option. That's also been factored into my fund balance calculations. So if we were to do that, then we were really going to be pushing our fund balance fairly low in a period where we don't have very much certainty over how our revenues are going to react as we continue to move through the COVID pandemic. So from a financial management standpoint, I think it would be wise to take advantage of these funds to shore up that fund balance, to give ourselves a little breathing room as we go forward through the next 3 to 5 years. If something changes, we could certainly go back and defease these bonds early, or refund them or make some other changes. But I think this will give us puts us in a good place as we start to move forward into the 2021 budget and beyond.
So do you have a place for the $9 million net from the juvenile center? I mean, it sounds like you've already spent that on something else.
No, that will be part of the fund balance that we'll carry at the end of 2020, which, as I said, I estimate at $50 million, assuming we go forward with this bond issue.
So you're figuring in that 9 million in the 50 million?
Correct.
So you've already accounted for that in your fund balance.
That's correct.
And that will be a positive fund balance going forward?
Yes, we can't have a negative fund balance. So it's all positive, and it's, as I said, $50 million estimated at the end of 2020. Again, that's as of 12:13 p.m. on June 30th. We have a very fluid revenue environment, so we've made a lot of assumptions on this revenue estimate. We'll be updating it frequently.
With 30-year commitment to the settlement at 2.47%, what's the likelihood of that going lower on a refi during that 30-year?
It just depends on market conditions. So it's hard to speculate on that. But we review our bonds annually, and those that are ripe for refunding, we bring those forward when we feel like we can get significant economic savings.
On the other two bills, you're saying that we're not extending the original 30 years or whatever it is for those bonds. We're refinancing within the 30-year?
That's correct. Those bonds will have the same footprint, so we aren't extending the time. For example, if you're refunding or refinancing your home, you may refinance that over another 30 years or another 15 years. These will be in the same footprint, so we won't extend the time period. So general obligation bonds will still be retired in 2032, and the special obligation bonds will still be retired in 2035.
Is there any way of paying those off quicker since we are at a lower interest rate? Or do we start back with the lower interest rate and with less principal, like you would on a home? In other words,
Yeah.
are we going to be able to pay that off quicker than 30 years with the lower interest rate or not?
Now, the way these are structured, taking the interest savings, using the new refunding rate over that time period, and it'll provide, if we want to accelerate payment, then you're looking at a bit of a budget shock there. So we're still trying to work within the confines of our existing budget to get that done and produce the savings.
Okay. And then you said that on Bill 137, we're paying back the money we borrowed from Prop P for the property purchase on the police stations, correct?
That's correct. So what we will show in our Prop P fund balance calculation is a positive 3.5 million back into that Prop P fund balance. And then Prop P will also pay the annual debt service, again, for the 20-year term of those bonds.
And is that for the North County and the South County precincts?
That was the South County precinct.
Just the South County.
Correct.
And do we have a plan for the North County?
We purchased the North County precinct using bond proceeds from a 2017 bond issue.
Okay, so we don't have to do anything there?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
One question,
Any
Madam
other-
Chair, may I?
Yes, Councilwoman Days.
Yes, Paul, we did not have any new construction factored in with the Prop P money from the beginning.
Well, the original Prop P funding plan did call for the 2 police precincts, and we issued about $15 million in 2017 to start that project. And we had intended to purchase the South County precinct with bond proceeds, but there were some technicalities involved in that purchase at the time. So we used our cash balance of Prop P. And so now we're coming back and structuring that debt over time, like we had originally hoped.
So you're going to backfill that, in other words, the Prop P, or is that the
That's
correct word?
correct.
I don't even know if that's the correct terminology, but is that
That
is
works.
that works?
That
Okay.
works for me.
All right. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Councilman Tracus.
thank you. Paul, good to see you as always. I have just some general questions, if you can, with respect, since we're approaching the budget time. Do you have any prognostication or projection as to what the revenue shortfall might be with respect to the county's tax revenue, given the impact on the economy because of the measures that were necessitated by the COVID pandemic?
Well, I can tell you what my thoughts are, again, as of this moment, and those change pretty frequently as we get new data points. But the revenue estimate I've settled on right now shows in the general revenue fund alone, a $25 million decrease in revenue compared to the 2019 amount. And of that, the majority of that impact is going to be felt in sales tax, casino tax, certainly, and then some of our other, our non-tax sources are kind of all over the board. I will say that I have already improved this estimate once, and I think it seems like the impact isn't going to be quite as dire as I had first anticipated it might be. So really the big indicator for us is sales tax revenue, and I'm looking forward to receiving the May sales tax data here on July 10th, and that will help to better inform that estimate going forward. I do think that we're going to see kind of what we call a tick mark shaped recovery in our revenues, in that we have a sharp drop off and we will be building those back over time, likely over a period of several years. But there are still a lot of assumptions built into that. There's no second wave. There's no other shock that comes in as a part of this. So it's very much a fluid situation. And as I said, we're updating that frequently.
Right, so if I understand correctly, then bottom line is there is going to be some decrease in revenue regardless of what happens with respect to how soon the economy comes back. There's going to be a negative result, correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
And thinking about the budget numbers over the past several years, we're pretty much to the bone anyway in terms of revenue compared to expenses. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. We kind of walk a fine line there.
Right. And so given that we're dealing with less revenue now, isn't, with respect to the refinancing called for in these various bills, isn't it prudent fiscal management to go ahead and bonds because we need to be concerned with respect to decreased revenue? Or am I missing something?
I believe that's correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilman Tracus. Any further questions?
I do
All right. Follow up, Councilman Fitch, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Paul yep, thank you. Paul, the debt service on Bill 137, the 30-year bonds that we're going to sell, it's $520,000 a year, correct?
That's correct.
That will come out of general revenue and not property.
Yes, I believe there's legislation that specifically prohibits the use of Prop P. I'm sure if it's a legislation or it was a policy statement, but we're specifically excluding this from Prop P.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, one other question, please.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilwoman Days.
Thank you. Paul, is there any we had talked a little bit about early payment of these. Is there any penalty for early payment if we're able to somehow get extra money? Is there any penalty involved in that?
I may need to defer to our financial advisor or bond counsel on exactly when we could call these bonds and refund them. But once we get to that point in the bond schedule, then we can make a determination whether we want to defease those bonds or refund them or take other action.
Okay, but the penalty clause, that's my question.
Yeah,
We don't know if.
I see.
Yeah, Paul, this is Adam Pope from Columbia Capital, the county's financial advisor. For the Bill 137 bonds, those will have what's called an optional redemption date of 10 years. So in 2030 would be the earliest that those bonds could be called. Unlike a home loan where you can kind of do it anytime you'd like, when you sell municipal bonds, you have a lockout period, so that investors know that they're going to get repaid at least for that amount of time. So, but as Paul said, we could defease the bonds, and in that case, we would make a deposit into an escrow account for the amount to pay the debt service on the bonds until that 2030 call date. But there's no additional premium penalty or anything like that. It's just par plus whatever debt service needs to be paid until we get to that optional redemption date of 2030.
I see. Thank you.
Anything further? All right, we have no public comments this afternoon. Unless there is any further discussion or questions from the council, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Madam
moved.
Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.